Sir, back up. Step away from her right now.
This is my store. You don't talk to her that way.
She's being detained. Move aside.
For what? She already showed you her ID. You don't have anything.
Back up or you'll be in cuffs too.
Go ahead. I'm not letting you.
ICE agent Chad Jenkins burst through the doors of Henderson's corner market like a man on a mission, his eyes locking onto 24-year-old Maya Washington behind the register, his voice cutting through the quiet store as he demanded proof of citizenship from a young black woman who was simply doing her job. Maya's hands didn't shake as she pulled out her driver's license and state ID, sliding them across the counter with the calm of someone who had nothing to hide. But Jenkins barely glanced at the documents before shoving them back, claiming they could be forged and that she needed to come with him for verification. As Agent Collins moved to block the door and Jenkins reached for his handcuffs, his fingers already closing around Maya's wrist while customers stood frozen in shock. What neither agent knew was that 4 people were recording every second. The store owner was a former civil rights lawyer with the ACLU on speed dial, and Maya Washington was born at the hospital just 8 miles down the road. What they also didn't know was that their refusal to accept valid U.S. identification from an American citizen would trigger a federal investigation that had been building cases against Jenkins for over 2 years. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to smash that subscribe button for more stories you don't want to miss. Maya Washington had worked at Henderson's Corner Market for 3 years, ever since she graduated from community college with an associate's degree in business administration. The young black woman knew every regular customer by name, her box braids pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the store's green apron over a simple black t-shirt. On this Tuesday afternoon in March, she was doing exactly what she'd done 1,000 times before, scanning groceries, making small talk, keeping the line moving. She'd just handed Mrs. Margaret Hayes her receipt when the bell above the door chimed and 2 men in dark jackets strode in with an authority that made everyone look up. Agent Chad Jenkins had been with ICE for 8 years, developing a reputation for getting results, though those results often came with complaints that were quietly filed away and ignored. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, he'd long ago stopped seeing the people he detained as human beings. When Jenkins pointed toward the register and said, "That one," his partner, Agent Collins, simply nodded and moved to block the exit. Maya looked up as Jenkins approached, badge already out, his expression leaving no room for pleasantries. "I need to see proof of citizenship. Now," he said, his voice loud enough that the 5 customers scattered throughout the store all turned to look. Maya felt her stomach drop, not because she had anything to hide, but because she recognized the look in his eyes. It was the look of someone who'd already decided what she was before she'd opened her mouth. "Of course," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, extracting her driver's license and state ID. "Here's my license and my state ID. I'm an American citizen." She placed both documents on the counter, right in front of Jenkins. Jenkins picked up the documents with 2 fingers and gave them a glance that lasted maybe 3 seconds before tossing them back onto the counter. "These could be fake. Anybody can get documents like this made. You're going to need to come with us for proper verification." Maya blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "These are legitimate state-issued identification. My driver's license has—" "I said they could be fake," Jenkins interrupted, his voice hardening. "Agent Collins, secure that exit." "Ma'am, you're being detained for questioning regarding your immigration status." He pulled his handcuffs from his belt, the metal glinting under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the elderly white woman Maya had just served, gasped audibly. A younger man in a construction vest near the refrigerators pulled out his phone, fumbling to open the camera app. A teenage girl by the chip aisle whispered, "Oh my God," to her friend, and both started recording. Another customer, a middle-aged black man in a business suit, stepped closer, his phone raised. "She showed you her ID," he called out sharply. "What more do you want?" Jenkins didn't even look at him. "Sir, step back or you'll be charged with interfering with a federal investigation." His hand closed around Maya's wrist, and she instinctively pulled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I was born here," Maya said, her voice louder now, breaking slightly. "I've never even left the country. My birth certificate is at home. I can call someone to bring it. I can—" You can cooperate, Jenkins said, tightening his grip. Or we can add resisting detention to the charges. Collins moved to flank Jenkins' side, his presence clearly meant to intimidate. The store felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with tension, as 4 phones recorded every moment, every word. Outside, a silver Mercedes sedan pulled into a space near the entrance. The driver, Richard Coleman, a white man in his late 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes, cut the engine and grabbed his briefcase. Rick Coleman owned Henderson's Corner Market, but more importantly, he'd spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney before transitioning to business. He was completely unaware he was about to walk into a situation that would put every skill from his legal career back into action. Inside, Maya's eyes were filling with tears. Not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of people she saw every day, in the place where she'd worked honestly for years. Her brown skin felt hot with shame and anger as Jenkins reached to cuff her other wrist. Mrs. Margaret Hayes' shaky voice cut through the tension. "Someone call Mr. Coleman. Call Rick right now. This is wrong. This is so wrong." The construction worker was already typing frantically. "Boss, get here now. ICE harassing Maya for no reason." He hit send just as Jenkins snapped the first cuff around Maya's wrist, the metallic click echoing through the silent store like a gunshot. The metallic click of the handcuff around Maya's wrist was still hanging in the air when the front door of Henderson's Corner Market swung open with enough force to make the bell above it ring sharply. Rick Coleman stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the scene with the trained precision of someone who'd spent years walking into courtrooms and knowing within seconds what kind of battle he was facing. What he saw made his jaw tighten, and his briefcase dropped to his side with a heavy thud. His employee, a young woman he'd known for 3 years as reliable, honest, and hard-working, was standing behind the register with one wrist already cuffed. 2 men in ice jackets flanked her like she was some kind of dangerous fugitive. 4 customers stood frozen with their phones out, recording everything, and on the counter between the agents and Maya sat her driver's license and state ID, completely ignored and dismissed as if they meant nothing. Rick didn't raise his voice, but his tone cut through the store like a blade. "What exactly is happening here?" Agent Jenkins turned, his expression showing irritation at the interruption, rather than any concern about being caught doing something wrong. "This is a federal immigration matter, sir. I'm going to need you to step back and let us do our job." Rick walked forward instead of backward, setting his briefcase down on the counter with deliberate care. He picked up Maya's driver's license and state ID, examining them with the thoroughness that Jenkins had completely skipped. His face remained calm, but anyone who knew him well would have recognized the specific kind of stillness that meant he was absolutely furious. "I'm Richard Coleman. I own this store. Maya Washington has worked for me for 3 years. She is an American citizen, born in this county, and you are currently detaining her, while she holds valid state-issued identification. So I'll ask you again, what exactly is happening here?" Jenkins shifted his weight, his hand still gripping Maya's cuffed wrist. "These documents could be fraudulent. We have the authority to verify citizenship status and detain individuals for questioning when we have reasonable suspicion." Rick's eyebrow went up slightly, and he turned to look at the 4 customers still recording on their phones. Did anyone here see Agent Jenkins actually examine these documents before declaring them fraudulent? The construction worker spoke up immediately, his voice steady and clear for the camera. He barely looked at them, maybe 3 seconds. Then he threw them back on the counter and said they were probably fake. Mrs. Margaret Hayes nodded vigorously, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. "He didn't even read them, Mr. Coleman. He just decided she was guilty of something before he even walked through that door. We all saw it." The middle-aged man in the business suit added his voice to the growing chorus of witnesses. "He told her she was being detained before he even touched her ID. This whole thing has been wrong from the start." Rick turned back to Jenkins, and his voice dropped lower, becoming the same tone he'd used in courtrooms when he was about to dismantle a weak argument. "So, what you're telling me is that you entered my store, targeted my employee without any warrant or probable cause, demanded identification, refused to properly examine the valid government-issued documents she immediately provided, declared them fraudulent without any basis, and then proceeded to physically detain an American citizen in front of multiple witnesses who are currently recording your every move. Agent Collins, who had been silent up until this point, took a small step backward. His face had gone slightly pale, and his eyes kept darting between Jenkins and the phones recording them. He was newer to this, and unlike his partner, he seemed to be rapidly calculating just how badly this situation could go for both of them. Jenkins, however, was either too arrogant or too committed to his course of action to back down. We have the authority to conduct these checks. If she has nothing to hide, she can come with us for verification and be released once we confirm her status. Rick pulled out his own phone with his free hand while still holding Maya's identification in the other. I'm calling my former colleague at the ACLU right now. I'm also calling my contact at the local news station, and then I'm calling a friend who works in the regional ICE oversight office. But before I make those calls, I want to be absolutely clear about what's going to happen next. He looked directly at Jenkins, his blue eyes hard as steel. You are going to remove those handcuffs from my employee immediately. You are going to acknowledge that you have no legal grounds to detain her, and you are going to leave this store. Because if you don't, I am going to make it my personal mission to ensure that what happened here today becomes a federal case study in civil rights violations. Maya, who had been fighting back tears during the entire confrontation, felt a surge of something between relief and vindication. Her voice came out stronger than before, directed at Jenkins. I showed you my valid ID. I told you I was born here. You didn't care about the truth. You just saw my skin color and decided I didn't belong. The teenage girl recording near the chip aisle spoke up, her young voice cutting through the tension. I'm posting this everywhere. My mom's a lawyer too, and she's going to want to see this. Jenkins' face had begun to change color, a red flush creeping up his neck as he realized that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The store was full of witnesses. Multiple recordings were already being made, and the man standing in front of him wasn't some intimidated bystander, but someone who clearly knew the law better than Jenkins wanted to admit. Rick pulled up his phone and started dialing, putting the call on speaker. A woman's voice answered after 2 rings. A CLU legal department. This is Jennifer Martinez. How can I help you? Jennifer, it's Rick Coleman. I need you to listen very carefully because I'm standing in my store right now, watching 2 ICE agents illegally detain one of my employees, despite her providing valid state identification. I have multiple witnesses recording, and I need documentation protocols started immediately. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of typing. Rick, I'm recording this call now for documentation. Can you confirm the agents' names and badge numbers? Rick looked at Jenkins expectantly, his expression making it clear that this was no longer a request, but a demand. Agent Jenkins, I'm going to need your full name and badge number. And Agent Collins, yours as well. Agent Jenkins stood there with his hand still gripped around Maya's cuffed wrist, his face now bright red, but he wasn't backing down yet. His pride wouldn't let him. He'd done this dozens of times before. Walked into stores and restaurants and construction sites, demanded papers from people who looked like they didn't belong, and walked out with detainees without anyone challenging him. The complaints that followed always disappeared into bureaucratic black holes, and his supervisors always backed him up with the same line about protecting national security. But Rick Coleman wasn't backing down either, and the phone on speaker with the ACLU attorney waiting for badge numbers had created a standoff that was rapidly attracting more attention. 2 more customers had entered the store and immediately pulled out their phones when they saw what was happening. The construction worker had started a live stream on social media, and the comment section was already filling up with outrage. Mrs. Margaret Hayes had called her daughter, who worked for the local newspaper, and she was apparently already on her way. The teenage girls had posted their videos with hashtags that were starting to trend locally. This wasn't going away quietly, and Jenkins was finally starting to understand that. Rick's phone was still on speaker, the ACLU attorney waiting, when he decided to turn the pressure up even higher. Jennifer, before these agents provide their information, I want to add some context. Maya Washington, the employee they're detaining, was born at County General Hospital on April 15, 2001. She graduated from Lincoln High School in 2019. She has a social security number, pays taxes, and votes in every election. She has never left the United States, not even for a vacation to Canada or Mexico. She presented valid identification immediately upon request, and Agent Jenkins here dismissed it as fraudulent after a 3-second glance. Would you say that constitutes racial profiling? Jennifer's voice came through the speaker, professional, but with an edge of anger. Based on what you're describing, Rick, yes, that's textbook racial profiling. If they had no specific warrant, no probable cause beyond physical appearance, and they refused to accept valid state identification, they violated her Fourth Amendment rights and potentially her civil rights under federal law. Jenkins finally spoke, his voice tight. We received a tip about potential undocumented workers at this location. Rick's expression didn't change, but his next words were devastating. Really? What time did you receive this tip, Agent Jenkins? Jenkins hesitated, and that hesitation told Rick everything he needed to know. Earlier today. What time exactly? Rick pressed. Because I'd like to cross-reference that with the store's security footage, which shows exactly what time you entered, and with the phone records that I'm sure a subpoena will reveal. I'd also like to know the specific details of this supposed tip. What was the caller's name? What information did they provide? Was it about Maya specifically? Or about the store in general? Because if you can't answer those questions, then we both know you're making this up right now to justify an illegal detention. The silence that followed was damning. Collins had taken another step back, and his face had gone from pale to almost gray. He was doing the mental math on how badly this could destroy his career, and the numbers weren't adding up in his favor. Jenkins, however, was still trying to salvage some authority from the wreckage. I don't have to justify our operations to civilians, Jenkins said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. We have broad authority under federal law to enforce immigration policy. Rick set his phone down on the counter, the ACLU attorney still listening to every word. Then he picked up his briefcase and pulled out a folder that he'd apparently grabbed from his car. He opened it and began reading in the same calm, measured tone that had once made opposing attorneys nervous in courtrooms. I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney before I bought this store. I've handled cases against ICE, against Border Patrol, against local police departments engaging in racial profiling. I know exactly what authority you have and what authority you don't have. And what you don't have is the authority to detain American citizens without probable cause, to refuse valid identification, or to make arrests based solely on racial appearance. He pulled out a specific page and held it up so Jenkins could see it. This is documentation from a case I won 3 years ago against ICE for almost this exact scenario. The agent involved was terminated. The agency paid a settlement of $300,000 to the victim, and new training protocols were implemented. But clearly those protocols didn't reach you, Agent Jenkins, because you're repeating the same violations right here in my store. Rick turned to the construction worker who was still live streaming. Sir, can you make sure you're capturing the badge numbers clearly on your video? I want to make sure we have clear documentation. Then he turned back to Jenkins with an expression of cold fury. Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to remove those handcuffs from Maya immediately. Not in 5 minutes. Not after you make a phone call to your supervisor. Right now. Because every second you keep an American citizen illegally detained while multiple witnesses record you is another second of violation that gets added to the federal lawsuit I'm going to file tomorrow morning. Maya spoke up then, her voice shaking but determined. I want to know why you didn't even look at my ID. I want to know what made you think you could just walk in here and treat me like a criminal when I've never broken a law in my life. Jenkins didn't answer her. He was staring at Rick, at the phone with the ACLU attorney still on the line, at the cameras recording him, at the growing crowd of witnesses. His hand finally released Maya's wrist, and he reached for the key to the handcuffs. But Rick held up his hand. Before you remove those cuffs, Agent Jenkins, I want to hear you say it. I want everyone recording to hear you acknowledge that you have no legal basis for this detention. The silence stretched out for several long seconds. Collins looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mrs. Margaret Hayes had tears running down her face. The construction worker's live stream had over 2,000 viewers now, the comments section exploding with demands for the agents' names and badge numbers. Finally, Jenkins spoke, his voice barely above a mutter. "We have no specific evidence that Mr. Washington is undocumented." "Louder," Rick said, "and be specific. You have no evidence because she's an American citizen who showed you valid identification that you refused to examine." Jenkins' face was purple now, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "She provided identification. We're releasing her." Rick shook his head. "That's not good enough. Say the whole truth, Agent Jenkins. Say that you racially profiled an American citizen and attempted an illegal detention." Agent Jenkins removed the handcuffs from Maya's wrist without another word, his hands shaking slightly as the metal clicked open. He and Agent Collins walked out of Henderson's corner market in silence, their heads down, while 4 different camera phones tracked their exit. The bell above the door chimed behind them, and for a moment, nobody in the store moved or spoke. Then Maya's knees buckled, and Rick caught her arm, guiding her to sit on the stool behind the register. Mrs. Margaret Hayes rushed over with a bottle of water, her elderly hands still trembling as she unscrewed the cap and handed it to Maya. The construction worker ended his live stream, which had peaked at over 5,000 viewers, and walked over to shake Rick's hand. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time," he said quietly. The teenage girls approached Maya carefully, asking if she was okay, telling her she didn't deserve what had happened. The middle-aged man in the business suit left his business card on the counter, identifying himself as an attorney who specialized in civil rights cases if Maya wanted additional legal support. Rick spent the next hour on the phone, first with the ACLU, then with a reporter from the local news station, then with his contact at ICE Oversight, and finally with a friend who worked at a civil rights organization that documented cases of racial profiling. Maya sat behind the register, still shaking, still processing the humiliation and terror of being treated like a criminal in the place where she worked, in the country where she was born. The videos went viral within hours. By that evening, the footage of Jenkins dismissing Maya's valid identification and Rick's confrontation demanding accountability had been viewed over 500,000 times across different platforms. Local news ran the story as their lead segment. National civil rights organizations picked it up and added Maya's case to their ongoing documentation of ICE overreach and racial profiling. Agent Jenkins was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Agent Collins, recognizing which way the wind was blowing, resigned before he could be fired and cooperated fully with investigators, revealing that Jenkins had a pattern of targeting people of color without cause that went back years. Maya filed a formal complaint with ICE Oversight and a federal lawsuit with the help of Rick and the ACLU. The lawsuit wasn't just about financial compensation, but about forcing policy changes and accountability. Henderson's Corner Market became a community hub for Know Your Rights workshops that Rick organized, teaching people what to do when confronted by immigration enforcement, what documents they were required to show, and how to document violations. 3 months later, Maya still worked at the store, though she struggled with anxiety every time someone in a uniform entered. But she also became an advocate, sharing her story at community meetings and high schools, making sure other young people of color knew their rights and understood that being an American citizen didn't always protect them from being treated like they didn't belong. The fight for justice was far from over, but at least now, people were paying attention. If stories like this matter to you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another one. Share and drop your thoughts in the comments below, telling us what you think should have happened to Agent Jenkins.